I ever leave this world alive, I'll come back down and sit beside your feet tonight. Wherever I am, you'll always be more than just a memory. Well, if I ever leave this world alive.
Hey folks, Professor Finn here, and today we're going to be talking about the National Board Exam. Now, students of funeral service education or mortuary science, when they attend mortuary school, are generally going to take the National Board Exam Arts and Sciences section upon completion of their course of study. Different regulations in different states can require different exams. California has something that's a little bit different. If you are not taking the associate in science or traditional mortuary school route here in the state of Florida, you may take a state board exam for the funeral director only license. But today we're going to focus specifically on the National Board Exam as it applies for the vast majority of students completing their mortuary education in the United States. And we're going to be referencing the International Conference of Funeral Service Examining Board's National Board Exam Study Guide. Now, the 12th edition is the most current edition available here as of May 2020. I purchased a copy of this that we go over in the classroom, and I then scanned this so that I have it in a PDF format so that I can annotate and do things on there. So you cannot purchase a digital version of this. To my knowledge, I created my own digital version of this, and this is their protected material. This is their book. Solely today, we are going to be looking at their content outlines so that we can get some insight as to what can be asked on what sections of the National Board Exam Arts and Sciences, so that when you walk into the exam, that you are prepared for what you may be asked. With any professional exam, there is a lot of material that is being assessed over the course of, in this case, 150 questions, and it can be extremely frustrating to study a large body of knowledge only to find out later on that, hey, they didn't ask me anything about this. Well, that is every person that has ever taken any type of professional examination ever. So you're in the same boat as doctors, lawyers, EMTs, nurses, etc. Now, for the sake of discussion today, I have removed anything that we are not going to be talking about. So this is not the complete National Board Exam Study Guide. It's only a portion thereof. And again, you need to purchase this if you are going to be taking the National Board Exam. You need to look at their content outlines. You need to look at their glossary. So you need to look at their practice questions. You need to prepare yourself for the exam in the best way possible. The purpose of today is only to discuss the professional expectations sections in each one of these, because it seems some people are misguided when it comes to what can be asked in what areas, and there are no other clarifying videos out there. So again, we're just going to focus on a couple of things, and you can see that this is a very large book, and the total amount of pages we have here is 23 because I've cut stuff out. But we're going to go right in the order that they appear, starting with the funeral service arts. We will start with funeral arranging and directing, management, counseling, legal and regulatory compliance, cemetery and crematory operations, and then we will go into the sciences section. So this might be a little bit of a long video, but overall, I think those of you who are prepping for the board will appreciate this. So I may just cover, one section then another. We'll see when we get there, because this is kind of being recorded off the cuff. I don't really do scripts or things like that. So let's look at the funeral arranging and direction section. So under the professional expectations, and I chose to comment via the professional expectations because seems to be a misalignment between the content outline and some of the things that are expected on the professional expectations. And I'm not going to do the comparison, but it seems that much more detail is available under professional expectations. And this gives you a better idea on where you may need to go look and find a material. Because if you just look at the content outline, you might not be getting the larger picture. So let's look at the initial contact procedures notification of death. Use of telephone, appropriate etiquette with communication skills. You would likely have found this in your funeral home operations or merchandising or management class. Every school teaches something just a little bit different. So we're looking at phone skills. What type of information is going to be required, check for pre-need arrangements, validate legal issues regarding transfer, i.e. Do we have permission to go do the removal in different areas of the country. You may need someone's approval prior to the pickup, especially if it's being released from an unattended death. The type of equipment and things that you need to do a transfer, and counsel the family regarding permission to embalm. What does the Federal Trade Commission say we need to do when it comes to embalming things like this? So this initial contact procedure seems to be very much the funeral director or the business side of things. There's nothing surprising there. And you should know where to find these things in the several textbooks that might be out there. An excellent text that is available to kind of narrow this stuff down is Funeral Directing and Funeral Service Management by Dr. Ralph Clicker. There's also Cornerstones or Fundamentals of Funeral Directing by John Fritsch. There are no lack of textbooks out there that can cover these initial contact procedures section. Next, we have the Arrangement Conference. Present various options to meet family needs and coordinate tasks, religious requirements, legal requirements, local customs. So a lot of things here. Prep for disposition tax related to religion and funeral director sort of things. Required price list, funeral details, officiant, date of time. So we see more about, funeral directing, what we do here. Obtain information for death certificate. Again, what funeral directors do. Discuss benefits and programs. Obtain signatures. And if we don't get, permission to embalm, what are the other forms that we need to do for, say, cremation or for minimum preparation of body, such as bathing. So again, nothing really deviating from the arts, quote unquote, business aspect of what we do. Going into pre-need, what are the types of pre-need that are out there, pre-planned versus pre-funded. If you do not recall, you can pre-plan a funeral where you write it all down on paper, you never fund it, and then pre-funding it does something different. If you pre-plan something and if you've done it in the most incorrect way possible, you may have set up a contractual relationship with the client, and you're obligated to follow through with what you have done. And most states don't like that if you are writing these pre-planned funeral arrangements without pre-funding them, that you may be found. You may get in trouble if you do not have a license to sell pre-need if this is what you're trying to do. States regulate this because they don't want you to run away with people's money, and for good reasons. Reasons for pre-need, why people may need to do this. Again, this is definitely something that falls in the business side of things. Types of contracts, this goes into your business law classes. Arrangement conference for pre-funded and pre-planned funerals. So, what do you need to do according to your state? What do you need to do according to national guidelines, FTC funeral rule, things like that. Alterations to pre-funded contracts. Remember, if they're going under a certain type of Medicare and Medicaid eligibility, you might have to use a non-revocable type of pre-need. In some states, like in the state of Florida, that is illegal. Unless they are going into that type of a situation, you cannot create a non-revocable pre-need contract under the laws of the state of Florida, unless there is a reason like Medicaid eligibility. Wishes of the deceased versus wishes of the funeral planner. Again, that differs from state to state, but generally, I shouldn't say even generally. Look at the laws of your state to see, which way it goes. In the state of Texas, for instance, if there's a pre-funded funeral arrangement, that's the way it's going to go down, like it or not. In the state of Florida, there may be some options for changing that around, and the types of different funding and what their benefits are: trust accounts, insurance versus savings and passbook accounts. So again, very much the artsy business side of things that we do. Documentation, why do we do it? How do we comply? What type of elements need to be on these things? Communication with family member, and other entities. You can't just kind of miracle these things after the fact. You need to get things done prior, and what your liability is from a business, personal, or technical standpoint. This also comes down to business models. So if you are a sole proprietor, God knows why you would want to do that. You may be, your personal assets may be up for grabs if you mess something up, which is why you need to know the different types of things that are out there and the types of shielding that you get from it. Don't want to, bump into something bad. Directing the funeral. So, so far so good. We're looking at stuff that you would find typically in your management, merchandising, operations types of classes. Nothing really sciencey. Although some of these things do fall into the sciences section. So it's, during your study of embalming, you are likely going to be talking about the FTC funerals that it pertains to the sciences, such as, permission to embalm, when you can embalm, pricing, those sort of things. But really, that's, an artsy side, the business side of what we do. Let's go look at directing the funeral. Pre-service details, preparation of the body after embalming. Well, hi there, kids. That is likely something that is not arts related, business related. That is likely something that is on the sciences arrangement. So what are some things that may fall into preparation of body after embalming? And for those of you in mortuary school, you better be thinking of anything that falls into the post-embalming care and treatment of the body. So you're looking at, when do you need to reaspirate and re-inject with cavity fluid? What type of corrections do you need to do? So the entirety of restorative art could be assessed under that statement. Mold prevention and storage could be assessed under that. So that is a very important piece of information, that if you are going into your National Board Exam Arts and you are not looking at the preparation of the body after embalming sections of the relevant textbooks, which is basically Embalming History, Theory, and Practice by Robert G. Mayer. There are several chapters in there that you might need to refer to, and virtually the entire study of restorative art is preparation of body after embalming. So color theory, makeup, all sorts of things can fall into flower arrangements. We'll come up a little bit later on with, we'll see that, that has to do with coordinating and arranging for the actual service. But that's an interesting section. That's a science section, science topic. So make sure that you are going back and looking at those. Coordinate details with clergy officiant, funeral home staff, cemetery, crematory. Okay, so the rest of this looks like, business as normal for what we do. Organize place of service, funeral home, church, other facility. So setting up, instruction and prep, view, placement of casket, floral pieces, tribute articles. So setting up, nothing there really really sciencey. Receiving visitors, role of staff, directions, seating, and attending to funeral details, wishes, religious customs, and expectations. This may also have to do with preparation of the body. Who knows? But it does say, the way I would interpret this as stuff that is service related, not so much family prep. But it would be a custom and expectation to have probably say a seat ready for the shomer if you're doing a Jewish service, so that the individual who is sitting that evening throughout the evening would have a place, or the individuals who will be taking turns can do things like that. But there's a little bit of flexibility in how this could be interpreted. Arrange procession according to local custom, seating arrangements, instruction to casket bearers, dismissal coordination. Okay, so the rest of these things look pretty good when it comes to is it on the business side or is it on the science side? But we do see that we have a strong science section here under preparation of body after embalming that you would not find in your business side textbooks only. You need to go back. You need to look at your restorative art book. There's restorative art by Ralph Clicker. There's restorative arts by J. Sheridan Mayer. Make sure you are going back and looking at those. Color and Cosmetic by J. Sheridan Mayer, another book there. Within the embalming book, you have numerous chapters that talk about post-embalming care of the body and storage, and there's an entire second section after chapter 25 that talks about restorative art in the embalming book. So make sure you go back and look at those because you may get questions like that according to this professional expectation on your national board exam. Aftercare, we do see some things here, like it says grief theory. So you may, there may be some bleed over between this and maybe the funeral service counseling section of the exams. But again, nothing here would be sciencey. This is all pretty much arts. Funeral customs. funeral, military, fraternal groups. So again, nothing here is looking like it's going to be a little bit crazy. Shipping of human remains and cremated remains. So it's important to note that a large chapter dedicated to this topic also occurs in your embalming book, chapter 25 of the Embalming History and Theory book by Robert G. Mayer. So it is important that you're not just looking at your business aspects when you're studying for this particular section, trying to prep the material. You also go and you look at one of the that section in the embalming book. So make sure you are taking a peek there because it is rather detailed in the embalming book. Cremation, range for cremation, range for disposition, cremated remains, legal restrictions, local customs. So this is definitely artsy side. You're not going to find a lot of this in the sciences section or science textbooks in general. And then alternative disposal methods, you see that there are really, some of this could be slanted probably towards some science questions like with anatomical donation. Do you perform cavity embalming in those sort of cases? The answer is no, you're not supposed to go ahead and perforate the internal organs and hollow and solid viscera because that needs to be, intact when you go ahead and study this during your human anatomy courses at the university for doctors and other interested individuals. So there may be a couple of small things here, but nothing really sciencey compared to what we've just seen. That prep for the post-embalming care is probably a little bit dangerous for most people because you're not looking at those things going into your arts exam in general. With funeral service marketing and merchandising. So we do see that we are looking at casket construction here. On the sciences side, there's not really a lot of items in there, although you may want to take a look at the restorative art and embalming when it comes to specifically like, in casketing someone and things like that. There may be a couple of questions just here and there that could be derived from material that has to do with that because of they do talk about caskets and sizes in some of the sciences books, but generally this is all going to be on your business aspect of things. So in your management, merchandising, and marketing books. Other containers, so the types of containers. I know in chapter 25 of the shipping chapter, basically in the embalming book, it does have some different names for things. Not likely those are going to be used with some frequency. I forget what it calls it in that chapter. It refers to something very specific, like a combination shipping tray or something like that, and for casketed shipping. And it is the nomenclature is an air tray. It calls it a little bit something different. I would not sit there and say, hey, they're going to probably ask a question on that because it's the only time that term ever appears, and it's much more mainstream to call things air trays. You can go ahead and look at the in the glossaries. One of the things omitted from this PDF are the glossaries, which are very important to look at for your national board exam. So if you do not see like combination air tray, it's a pretty safe assumption you're probably not going to get asked a question about that. I mean, you could. It's their exam. They can do whatever they want. They can pull matters from everywhere. But it's that term is not used at all by anyone. It's called an air tray. Cemetery merchandise and property, monuments and memorials, Muslim crypts, cemetery property. So again, business end, nothing crazy. Merchandising, display of merchandise. You may want to take a look at the lighting sections, okay, especially the lighting sections in your restorative arts books, because we do talk about lighting. And there may be, one or two comments made in some of those science books that talk about how it affects how it affects merchandise display as well as the display of the remains. Pricing, you're pretty much not going to find that anywhere but in a business arts book. Merchandise of service, that's probably not going to be anywhere in a sciences book, and we're not really seeing anything else here that's probably going to bump into the sciences. Let's look at funeral service counseling. So this is the psychology aspect of, that we teach in some courses. In some places we call it thanatology. And this is probably going to be a mixture of thanatology and sociology. So we see lots of the psychology aspects. We see the counseling aspects of what we do. And again, this would not be something you're probably going to find in any of the sciences books like chemistry, microbiology, or anything like that. Yeah, I can't really think of anything in there, in any of the sciences books that I've seen. If you want to throw something in the comments below, by all means, do it. But I don't likely see anything in there that's going to pop out from a sciences book. Mortuary law. The vast majority of this, if it is mentioned in a sciences book, is going to have to do with FTC funeral rule or the OSHA compliance, stuff like that. So at the end of the day, some of this could come from a sciences book, but realistically, the stuff you're reading in your sciences book is being parroted already in your mortuary law textbooks, in business law textbooks, especially the compliance with OSHA regulatory standards. Find the most detailed version of it, go from there. Compliance with FTC Commission funeral rule. So here you have price lists. Okay, here you have price lists. And obviously some of these things can bleed over into the sciences section, the vice versa, because it has to do with embalming and getting necessary authorizations. We see more of Medicaid qualification and pre-need. So the type, these questions can be found in different areas. So I'm not going to say you're going to get more pre-need or less pre-need on any one given examination, but if you see things like pre-need here and then pre-need in another section, chances are pretty good that if you are getting an exam and say it is heavy on pre-need, some of this is falling into the funerals, the legal and regulatory compliance section, and some of those questions might be falling into the professional expectations of the funeral director in arranging. Don't ever think when the international conference says we've created an exam and here are where the questions come from in the different sections. That is absolutely going to be the truth. They are legally obligated to give you an exam where those questions are traced to these sections. And that is something that they are held accountable for. So I am absolutely positive that the international conference is going to be giving you an exam where the questions are flagged for these different areas. But what might end up happening is one particular assessment instrument may have a couple more pre-need than others, so it looks a little bit more pre-needy than, say, another. And that's because some of those questions are falling into two categories. They're going to be asking me a lot of stuff on pre-need. They've told me whatever it's going to be. Well, fact of the matter is, you are getting questions in two different categories, and just because it happens to be heavy on the pre-need doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you're getting a skewed exam, for instance. Final disposition, cemeteries. So make sure when you're looking at final disposition, some of these things, that yes, go to the mortuary logbook. Make sure you also go to your history book. There's some things hidden in the history book when it talks about, especially like embalming history or things like that. So you may need to go in and look at a couple of non-traditional places. Basic American jurisprudence, nothing new there. Contracts, sales, negotiable instruments. You're not going to find any of this stuff in a sciences book. That's just the truth. Cemetery and crematory operations, history. So definitely look at your history book here. There are a couple of excellent textbooks out there. Fires of Change by John Fritch and Jay Altieri. That seems to be the de facto textbook when it comes to cremation and cremation history. But remember, you do have cremation history in the History of American Funeral Directing by Lamers and Haberstein. So you want to be going in and looking at those things. Legal implications, authorization to cremate. So you've seen authorization to cremate and things to do with cremation now in cemetery and crematory operations. You've seen it in mortuary law. You've seen it in professional expectations of a funeral director. You're probably even going to find them. We'll probably find like a section in the sciences that talks about, necessary authorizations for disposition. Fact of the matter is, again, you may get a lot of questions on cremation, but they are flagged in these different areas. Even with cremation in so many places, it may not be that your assessment instrument has a lot of cremation questions that are outright, and so you might be surprised. So this is why you have to prepare accordingly and look at everything, because you literally don't know what you're going to walk into. Just because this is been mentioned 3 times does not mean that you are going to get hit with this really heavy on your assessment instrument. Services, preparation, and identification of deceased for cremation. So that might pop up. Preparation, what does preparation mean for of a deceased for cremation? Removal of pacemaker. Does it mean, minimum ID view with topical disinfection? It could, be a couple of different things. So I'm not going to say, review the entire policy of embalming a body here, but certainly preparation and identification of deceased for cremation could imply some minimal prep. So you should, need to know basically, or essentially, what type of authorization you'd need to set features or topically disinfect the body, or even just shroud the body. Authority of authorizing agent, paramount right to authorize. So we've also seen something like this in the legal and regulatory compliance section above. Authorization for removal of medical devices. Can't just take out the pacemakers because you want to. You need permission. Treatment of personal property, what you should do there. So your identification. So yeah, the rest of this looks pretty artsy fartsy. So no big deal there. Investigating third-party crematories. Likely not going to have a whole lot of science here. Will say, however, that you should probably look at the disposal of remains by burial at sea, which I think appears in some of the sciences books as well. So make a note of where they hide the burial at sea stuff and make sure you go and look at all of that so that you've prepared for it. Cemetery history. Obviously, this is stuff that you're going to find in your history books. Generally, the history of American funeral directing, although there's several more exams out there right now, or several more textbooks that have been made by Larry Cleveland. Ralph Clicker just produced a history textbook. But for the most part, the history of American funeral directing has been the history book de facto for years that schools have used. So that is the one I will mention constantly. And there's also a history section in the back of the embalming book. So it may be worthy to go in there and take a peek and see if there's any information in that history of embalming that could possibly come into this area when it talks about churchyard cemeteries and things like that, because it has to be able to be linked to something here. Monuments, markers, green burials, disinterment. Could be, some possible sciencey stuff there, but green burial for the most part is discussed in your arts classes. Valid site equipment. Yeah. Confirm site improvements for interment. So, you might get a couple of questions. That could come from an embalming text there, but I would probably say not a lot because, how are you going to embalm someone for an above ground mausoleum? That's not really something that is stated verbatim in any of the textbooks. You just embalm like normal. So you shouldn't get anything crazy, should being the operative term. Cemetery terms, again, we saw that a little bit in another section. FTC, well. So that's that one, folks. That completes the arts, and we've seen that in the arts section there are some places that you can be asked some significant questions when it comes to embalming and restorative art on your arts section. So let's take a look at the sciences. Let's just keep on trucking. If you need to, take a break, go have a smoke, hit your vape, hit the doobie, or get a new Coca-Cola, by all means, pause the video and head over to the appropriate area to satisfy your vices. And when you come back, like, share, and subscribe, because why not throw in a selfless ad? Let's take a look at embalming. So, summary of embalming process. So, history of embalming. History of embalming is going to be both in your history book, so an arts book, the history of American funeral directing, as well as the history section of your embalming book. And if you have not looked at the history section of the embalming book, you really need to do that, because there are substantial differences in the information that is presented in the embalming book versus the history of American funeral directing book. And now likely you'll probably need to look at like Fires of Change, because if they have anything in there regarding embalming and prep and cremation, that could also be flagged as history of embalming. Professional conduct, care of the deceased. So yeah, so far so good. We're looking at sciencey stuff, pre-embalming body changes, so the agonal period, stuff like that. Little bit of artsy stuff here: technical orientation, equipment, instruments, supplies, and accessories. You may have some of that, like the sundry materials in your merchandising class that might be talked about there. So maybe you got to go take a peek at some of those things. But for the most part, these things are discussed in the embalming textbook. Embalming analysis, chapter that's like chapter 10 in your textbook. Eye nucleations and some of those things. That's the organ and skin donor section. Selection of arteries, that's like, towards chapter 10, like chapters 8 and 9 or something like that. Vascular injection, type of chemicals. So types of chemicals, that could come from some of the chemistry books. So Professional Trade School's Chemistry for Funeral Service has a section on embalming chemicals. Damon De La Cruz has a wonderful book out there. I think he talks about chemicals and how these things are used, kind of like an embalming primer. And there's also Thanatochemistry by Dorn, which might have a couple things in there. So make sure that you are looking at, a couple different sources when you're looking at embalming chemicals. You're not just, going all in on one book. Everything so far, as I'm just going to kind of scroll down here, everything so far looks pretty good for sciencey stuff. Not a whole lot of arts things. Everything there looks pretty legit. The only thing that could really jump on you is the history of embalming. When it comes to the history of embalming, you really do need to go look in your arts books for that. The same thing goes for restorative art. If there's any history stuff here in restorative art, you may need to go take a peek in some of the other books as well. So what is it? This is definitely, there might be some anatomy things here, subcutaneous tissue and integument. So as an example, I believe Ralph Klicker's textbook does not really mention in great detail subcutaneous tissue and integument. You'll find that in Restorative Art by J. Sheridan Mayer. And it will certainly be discussed in the anatomy portion of the education. So you may need to get like Anatomy for Funeral Service by Professional Trade Schools to look those things up. Facial markings, that's definitely RA. You're not going to find that anywhere else. This type of stuff. So, when they talk about post-embalming prep in the art section versus, restorative art here, what are some of the, what are the subtle differences? Well, chances are pretty good. And again, I can't speak for the conference. I can't speak for absolute certainty because I do not know what they put on their board exams. I am not an item writer, and even if I was, I would be under an affirmative obligation not to discuss the type of items that I have written. The fact of the matter is, it is highly unlikely that on an arts exam you're probably going to get asked anything about a facial marking regarding, is it natural or acquired? But you are likely going to get asked maybe an application question as it relates to preparing the deceased for the services. So questions regarding restorative art, facial markings might be, locked in for a sciences exam guaranteed, but say tissue building, which is a post-embalming treatment, and wax restoration, which is a post-embalming treatment, could make its way to both exams. So you have to kind of understand how these things work. And that could be the same exact thing for the interpretation of photographs. So, determining things like how to rebuild something, that is a post-embalming treatment. I can't speak definitively, but, that is some places that you can go with things. I would probably say like, structures of the ear or thing like that, or something they're going to be strongly related to the sciences. You're probably not going to get a whole lot of those on your arts section. But maybe ways of attaching a wax ear. That's completely different. That would be something relevant for post-embalming care. There's general restorative treatments. You can pretty much guarantee that everything here in this section can fall into the post-embalming category, along with the color theory. Color theory is definitely, whether it's illumination or pigment theory, you're going to, that's probably fair game. Cosmetology, absolutely fair game for your art section. Based on their statement, which is post embalming restoration. Prep for disposition, types of medical devices, removal documentation, disposition. Okay, so now this is looking artsy, right? This is looking artsy because, it talks a little bit about this in the sciences section, but you're not going to see this in a micro or path book or an anatomy book or chemistry book. It'll mention it in embalming. It'll mention a little bit in restorative art, but it mentions it a whole hell of a lot in, say, your operations and management books, or your mortuary law books. Dressing or special ceremonial preparation according to religious beef or fraternal organization requirement, that's downright arts. We're talking about very specific prep according to a religious belief. That is absolutely artsy stuff. So dressing Mormons in the appropriate type of clothing, the different pieces of clothing and shrouding for Jews, for Muslims, how maybe people are prepped when it comes to being clergy, what type of vestments they put in, those type of things. Preparation of the deceased for viewing without embalming, preparation of remains transferred in from another funeral home. So this is fairly sciencey. But if it's talked about in an arts book that the deceased isn't embalmed or something, you can pretty much want to flag that and add it to your study outline that, hey, when going in, I need to go take a peek at this thing. Placement and positioning the deceased in casket. Okay, yeah, it's nice. Receipt documentation, removal, return of paper. Okay, so there's some artsy stuff there as well. So same places. You can look for those mortuary law, and this really just comes down to the personal effects and how to dispose of things that you are given or return appropriately. Conditions needing aspiration, that's sciencey for sure. Prep for delayed Disney, so everything pretty much here, the rest of this looks sciencey. Funeral service sciences. This is the fun one because this used to be 3 different subject categories, I believe: anatomy, microbiology, and pathology and chemistry. This is 100% sciences here, folks. As we scroll through this and we look at these things, we are likely going to see that it is nothing you're going to find anywhere. So the good news is you should not be looking for any of this stuff in one of your arts books. But you can see that you can get into some dangerous areas if you are not looking in some of the arts places for your sciences and some of the sciences places for your arts. So make sure you are doing your job well and preparing for the exam seriously. If you have not purchased the National Board Exam Study Guide, you need to do it. You need to look at these professional expectations. You need to look at the content outlines, and they will help gear your study. And if you cannot answer a question, you need to go back to your professor and say, hey, where do you think I would find this, so they can help you locate the material? That is extremely important. You go into your board exams prepared, because there is an awful lot of information you studied in mortuary school. And you are absolutely going to have no idea other than the breakdown of the exam when you walk in. And your exam may be more, you may get more questions on your sciences exam about embalming and preparation, or get a lot of chemistry questions, or you have a perception of, man, I got asked a lot of anatomy, whatever it might be. But understand, these questions are flagged appropriately, so they fall into the subject matter category, so that every person receives the same questions in same number without exception. The fact that the information may be skewed towards one subject is just, a side effect of that. But the international conference does not create assessments that absolutely break their rules. They cannot do that. So folks, hope that you found this informative. If you do have questions about maybe exam preparation or things like that, feel free to throw something in the comments section or shoot me an email, and maybe that can be a topic for a future video. So this is Professor Finn signing off. We will see you next time.
All my memories gather round her, miner's lady, stranger to blue water. Dark and dusty, painted on the sky, misty taste of moonshine, teardrop in my eye. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home. Country road.